Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 107 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I'm your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you in emergency fashion on a Thursday afternoon. It's Halloween afternoon, and thank goodness someone else was available to do this podcast with me. Stephen Tolbert's here. Hello, sir. How are you?
What's up, buddy? Well, we said as soon as the World Series was over that things would get going pretty quickly. I did not expect the day after the World Series that the Braves would make one of their, arguably one of their biggest questions going into the offseason was what they were going to do at this spot. I did not expect that to have that answered day one of the offseason, but that's Alex, and here we are.
That is Alex, and here we are in emergency fashion to discuss the Braves sending Jorge Soler to the Los Angeles Angels in exchange for Griffin Canning. We'll dig into that, of course, in reactionary fashion here. But first, we should say at the top of the show, we are part of the Foul Territory Network of podcasts. Please go ahead and subscribe to Hammer Territory anywhere you find your podcasts. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, and you can even see our shiny faces right now on YouTube, where I would hope that you would like the episode as you're watching it, and please subscribe and tell your friends. And look, you and me and Scott did about a 50-minute discussion about 2 weeks ago on this same podcast feed about the Braves facing this DH conundrum, basically, where they had too many bodies that were DHs. Not that they're bad players. They're all good players, including Jorge Soler. He's a very good DH in a lot of different ways. But that is kind of pretty much the obvious reason why this deal seems to have happened, is that the Braves looked at the same thing we did, and they realized Jorge Soler can't play the outfield anymore. We have 2 DHs and 2.5 DHs maybe going into the season. So if you want more on that whole topic, listen to that podcast. But Steven, it strikes me like that's pretty much the underlying thing here, right? Like it's just a reaction to that. And the Braves are, they're cutting salary too, but more so just addressing a spot where they had to make a change of some kind.
Yeah, I mean, it's if Soler had played better defense, I think there's a world where they don't feel like they have to do this. Like if his defense was where the level maybe they thought it was going to be when he got signed, or I'm sorry, when he got traded for, they probably could have talked themselves into a scenario where they could kept everybody and just use the depth. But his defense was just so atrociously bad. I mean, as bad as any outfielder I've ever seen, quite honestly. And I think they were stunned by it. I do think they thought he could do it passably. I mean, obviously they did. They signed him, or they traded for him. So and I think they were stunned by how bad he was. And I don't think they had any confidence going forward. I mean, we talked about it all in a 50-minute show that the three of us did. And so this was, I mean, we said it that night, this was the inevitable conclusion to this, is that one of these guys was going to get moved. It was very unlikely that it was going to be Ozuna. The Braves love Marcell Ozuna. He's adored in that clubhouse. He obviously was the best hitter on the team last year. And he's, almost certainly going to pick up his option that's due in the next few days. But so, yeah, this was the inevitable conclusion. Soler was almost certainly going to be the guy, who was going to be moved with Ronnie coming back. And I'm stunned it happened day one of the offseason. The return is interesting, which we'll get to in a minute. But yeah, hopefully people that listen to that show should not be surprised by this. This was always the most likely outcome, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what we said even on that show. Like we did outline other scenarios that were possible, but in the end, we circled back to, trading Soler is the easiest button to press, basically. And, this deal is interesting, as we'll get into now, I guess. In a vacuum, so Jorge Soler is considerably better at baseball than Griffin Canning. So if you just want to look at it that way, like obviously it doesn't look great through that aspect, but there's money involved here. There's positional crunch here. It's Soler and his remaining 26 million or so in cash over the next 2 seasons for Canning, who is actually in his final arbitration year, which we'll discuss in a second. But just to remind people a little bit about this, about the defense that you already talked about, I think Soler is a DH only player. He has been quite good the last couple of years as a hitter. Like he's a really good baseball player if he's not playing defense. So it is a loss through that aspect. Like, would it be nice to have a guy like that in your lineup every day? Sure, it would be, but you have to just be practical about it. And that's kind of the fallout here because, again, it's going to look strange if you're not like into every nuance of baseball. If you're just a fan and and I'm not saying you have to be into all this stuff. It's going to look odd for them to do a 1-for-1 of a player who I think everyone would agree is better than the guy they're getting back. That's one thing that's complicated about baseball. But look, we'll get into this now, I guess. They're going to save at least probably 7 or 8 million this year doing this, and it might be 13 million, depending on what they do with Griffin Canning. and then that money can be repurposed. It's not a salary cap sport, but they're up against the luxury tax, all these things. But is this return terribly sexy? I would say no. But even on that show that we did, Stephen, we kind of said, look, they're not going to get this like home run return for Jorge Soler. Like the big thing is, and I think it was actually important that we were waited until we knew this. And I think Mark Bummer reported it already, and others have now, I think, since then. The Braves are not eating any of the salary here. The money is going entirely with Jorge Soler to Los Angeles. And that was the question that we had on that show was like, all right, are they going to have to pay to get off of him? The answer to that was no.
Yeah, I would have been surprised if the Braves, well, first of all, if they'd made a deal this early and ate money. Um, you know, I said it, I think I said it that night, but like as a DH, Soler is on a perfectly fine contract. Like there's nothing
Yep.
crazy about paying Soler. There was some confusion. He's actually paid $13 million over the next 2 years. He had a signing bonus when he signed his first year with San Francisco, which cut some of the AAV down. A lot of people were reporting 16. It's actually 13 million, like Brad just said, 26 million over the next 2 years, which is just that's a perfectly reasonable. I mean, for a guy that can sit in the
Yep.
middle of your lineup, $13 million is quite honestly, I mean, a pretty favorable contract, in my opinion. Ozuna's going to make, I think, 18 million or 16 or 18 million on his contract option. So 13 million is fine. I didn't think the Braves would have any trouble at least moving the money. I was very curious to see if they would get anything of note back. Griffin Canning is certainly a player of note. I mean, people have heard of him. He was a high draft pick. I think he was a second round pick for the Angels. So like that, it's notable. He's got some pedigree. He does have some upside. It's not just nothing, but yeah, I mean the Braves clearly wanted to get off of this money. They clearly wanted to get off of this DH situation, which I think is more important than the money. They just didn't. He just didn't fit the roster anymore, and really didn't fit the
Yeah.
roster when they traded for him. They just hoped his defense would be better than it ended up being. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, just player for player, Soler for Canning, the Braves got worse. But this is also one of those deals where there's going to be more deals that come as offseason goes where this will make a little more sense as the money that got freed up gets used, or we see what their next moves are. This is one of those where you don't really want to judge just off of this move alone. There's going to be other moves coming that probably make more sense. But honestly, for people that listen to the show, it shouldn't be that confusing. They just didn't
Yeah.
have room for Soler, and they needed to move somebody, and he was the obvious choice.
Yeah, we're big into nuance and trying to give context on the podcast, and that's what we're going to do. It's just wanted to at least lead with that, like, hey, this might seem weird. It's really not. It's pretty straight ahead. And you mentioned this twice now, but I think we should just say it's Halloween as we're recording this podcast. The World Series ended yesterday, literally last night, and what, 15, 16, 17 hours later, they make a trade. They can't even sign free agents for 4 more days. And so we were kind of like not exactly anticipating a major move today. But Alex does what Alex does. It started to leak a little bit. There was a couple reports, but within 4 minutes, it was being announced by the team. So it wasn't like there was any. It's just one of those Alex works in the darkness, and immediately they were making a move. And we'll talk about Canning, kind of the fallout in a second. But I mean, Jorge Soler. Just to go back to the context thing, yes, they traded for him, but they traded for him in a situation where they were trying to not go all in, but I think if you gave Alex Truth Serum, they probably knew it wasn't an ideal acquisition when they made it because they knew there was at least some question about his defense. They thought, as you said earlier, and you're right, that it probably would be better than it was. But he had been DHing previous to that. It was just a limited option situation where the Braves had so many injuries, Acuna, all those things, and they also wanted to compete and not let the season slip away. And he was the best hitter arguably available on the market, so they made that move. But this whole cycle, it does seem strange. It's been 3 months basically since they traded for him at the end of July. Right now it's the end of October, and they traded for a hero as well, an organizational hero. We've all seen the home run a bazillion times for 2021, and now he comes in and out again in 3 months. And it's just the way things go, I guess, at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I mean, people will debate whether or not it was a successful trade. I mean, they got him for nothing. The Giants salary dumped him and Luke Jackson to the Braves, and they got a very low level prospect in return. They were dumping salary as well, and Soler hit. I mean, he did what he was supposed to do. He hit. Now, of course, the defense became a big story, But
No, but he
I mean,
did. Actually, there was actually people like that kind of downplaying that I saw today, just to have the numbers out there. With the Braves, Soler hit 9 home runs in 49 games with an 849 OPS.
yeah,
Like he was a very clearly above average hitter with the Braves. Like
yeah,
there was no question about that. And it's just that even the WAR. It's kind of funny. Not funny is maybe the wrong word, but his with above replacement calculation. If he had just been DHing, he would have been way better in that calculation. It's just that his defense was so bad that it dragged it down. But that wasn't because of the reason he was acquired was to hit. To your point,
right. It wasn't his fault that they put him in right field. I mean, he
correct.
did what he was brought over to do, which was hit. And that's what the Angels just traded for him to do, is to hit. I guarantee you he's going to DH most of the time. The Angels play in a massive ballpark. There's no chance he's playing in that outfield. And so, I actually have some questions about the fit with LA, considering Trout has dealt with so many injuries. I thought he would DH a bunch for them. There's no chance Soler can play in that outfield. I don't actually love this deal for the Angels, to be honest, if I'm just talking about fit, but this is obviously a Braves podcast. But yeah, he hit. And if he had been DHing for the Braves this whole time and he hit, then people would view this trade very differently. It's just because he played in the outfield that people have any negative opinions at all of Jorge Soler, in my opinion. I think he did exactly what he was supposed to do. And I nothing about this surprises me. I hope it doesn't surprise anybody who's listened to the show.
Yeah.
This all should be very, very normal.
I agree, and we'll dig into the return. And there's some interesting nuance, and I would say some uncertainty as we record this. So we're recording this podcast on Thursday afternoon. Is uncertain on what we're going to do with Griffin Canning. We'll get into all of that and more in a second. But first, a word from our partners on the podcast today. All right, Stephen, let's discuss Griffin Canning a little bit because this is the return for Jorge Soler. He could be a non-tender candidate. So let's just start there. There is a chance that the Braves are going to non-tender him. He is in the final year of arbitration. I know pre-trade he was projected by MLB Trade Rumors for about $5.1 million in an arbitration salary. He was not worth that much last year. He was worth a lot more than that the previous year. So there's a little bit of interesting dichotomy there. But the way that I would frame this first is, this is just me interpreting it from the outside. This is not reporting anything. The Braves could have just traded Soler to the Angels for nothing if they were going to non-tender Griffin Canning. Now, they still could. It wouldn't shock me. But the Braves didn't have to take Griffin Canning back. It wasn't like the Angels had a reason to trade him because they didn't owe him any money. They could have just non-tendered him themselves and been done with it. So it seems to me, based on that indicator, that the Braves at least probably like Griffin Canning, or at least see something potentially in Griffin Canning. Now, that I'm not sure that that's going to mean that they're going to offer him the tender, but at the same time, there's some interesting stuff here. So we don't have to go super deep on Griffin Canning, but he's a guy that you mentioned, like it's not like a super household name, but has been in the majors for 5 seasons, had a major injury that we'll discuss, but not a zero return, but a potentially nuanced one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's thrown about 300 innings in the last 2 years for the Angels as a starter. Honestly, just that alone has value. Just that you're healthy enough to throw 150, average 150 innings the last couple of years. He's not a huge stuff guy. He throws about 93, 94. He actually doesn't use his fastball. His best pitch is his changeup, and he throws that a ton. He throws a lot of off-speed stuff. There is a move in baseball towards less and less fastballs, more and more changeups, more off speed. We just watched a guy pitch for the Yankees who threw like 75 changeups in a row. So like, this is not crazy. The problem for the thing that's going to hurt Griffin Canning is he doesn't have any minor league options. And it sounds like a small thing, but that's a massive thing when you are a kind of a fringe fifth starter. Like the Braves have a bunch of these like fifth starter candidates, Elder, Winans, all the guys, all the AAA guys that everybody knows and saw last year. But the difference is all those guys had options. And so if they didn't pitch well, they could just be sent to Gwinnett and somebody else came up. That was the whole shuttle that happened last year before Spencer Swellenbach came. Griffin doesn't have that option. He doesn't have minor league options. And so I'm very curious to see what they do. You're 100% right, and Scott brought that up in our DM in our battery or our Hammer Territory chat, was that they didn't have to. They could have just sent Soler to LA for nothing, and so they obviously like something about him. But unless he's going to also pitch out of the bullpen, which allows you to have a little more flexibility, having a guy as a fifth starter option who doesn't have options, who's making real money, $5 million is real money, assuming that's what it ends up being for the arbitration panel. That's tough. It's tough not to be able to do anything with him if he's not pitching well. And again, if you cut him now, you don't owe him any of that money. Versus if you
Mhm.
wait and put him on the roster and then try to DFA him, you owe him all of that money.
Right.
So when you cut him matters quite a bit here in terms of savings. And if you don't think he's going to be a real rotation candidate for you, you have to make that decision pretty quickly because some rules have changed about how arbitration gets paid out. We're not going to get into all that, but yeah, it is a very interesting situation.
Yeah, and maybe there's a third path where they go to Canning and say, "All right, you probably are going to get $5 million as a free agent. How about we don't tender you and then we offer you 2 million or whatever it's going to be?" There's something
Yeah.
like that too.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Obviously, he has no loyalty to Atlanta. He's never been here to this point, so it's nuanced. But I still think that like if you just kind of do a little bit of tea leaf reading there, the Braves probably see something in him. And just as a quick rundown, like he's mostly been a useful back rotation starter when he's been healthy since he came up in 2019. He was very solid in 2020. Then he had this major back issue. He missed like a year and a half with a back issue, which is weird. Like honestly, when I saw that he missed the season, I just assumed it was elbow or shoulder because that's almost
Yeah.
almost, but it was like, oh, it's a back injury. That's interesting. But he's been back for 2 years. He was actually quite good in 2023. Like he was worth about 2 wins. Like not even, he was a good, I would say a solid third, fourth starter guy with that kind of level pitcher in 2023. But then this last year in 24, he threw a career high in innings, but mostly was not very good in those innings. And I was actually reading something by Sam Blum of The Athletic, who covers the Angels, and basically all of his stuff played down. Like his velocity was down this year compared to previous years. The K rate spiked in the wrong direction. It went way down. You don't love that. He was really awful to start games. He had like a 7.5 ERA in the first inning, which is like just weirdly terrible. And this is a 28-year-old guy. Like it's not he's like 36 where he's like going to be cooked. But you mentioned the changeup. Like maybe there's something to unearth on like how he uses it. He's been with the Angels the whole time. Maybe the Braves are like, aha, we see something in this pitcher. We're gonna fix him. That's happened before for the Braves. They've done a good job with that in the past. But he's not a no-brainer to be in rotation. Your point's 100% right. Like they kind of have to think that he's a pretty good candidate to be the fifth starter to pay him $5 million or that approximate number. Maybe he's a relief candidate too. That's a possibility. He doesn't scream at me reliever, given he's not a super hard thrower, but maybe that's an idea too, where Alex is like, all right, this is gonna be our fifth reliever for next year at $5 million. That's also fine too. But we just don't know, and Alex hasn't said anything yet. So
Yeah.
questions.
And it's more complicated when, as of right now, his salary is not guaranteed. But if he makes the opening day roster, his salary is guaranteed. So like, it's not a normal situation where you can just test him out in April and see if he does well, and if he doesn't, then you just cut him loose. Like, there's a very big difference about when that happens. And
Yep.
if he can pitch in the bullpen, that does alleviate some of that because it gives you more flexibility. If he's not pitching great out of the bullpen or out of the rotation, you don't have to cut him. You can just move him to the bullpen. Like if he can do both, it helps a ton to make this decision. But yeah, it is it's an unusual situation. I said on Twitter that I would not be stunned if he got DFA'd. I still stand by that, but like
Yeah.
you said, they didn't have to include him in this deal at all. They obviously like something about him. So yeah, it's interesting. I'm very curious to see what happens here.
I am too, and I'm sure most people don't like. Let us know what happens at the end. Like
Yeah, exactly.
but at the same time, like I get that too. I just think that if he had guaranteed money and they took him back, I would be like, all right, the Angels were just making the Braves pay this tax to take Soler,
Right.
and that would have made
Yeah.
sense too. Like it wouldn't have been a weird thing that would have happened there if he was guaranteed $5 million. You just keep him around. If he makes the team, whatever. But because there's this decision right now where they can get off that for nothing.
Right.
They have to proactively like him to keep him around.
And
Like
no minor league options.
no minor league options. Yeah. And maybe, they are probably going to lose Jesse Chavez, we think, to retirement. He's been one of their longer relievers last year plus. Luke Jackson is a non-tender candidate. I would say likely to be non-tendered at this point. So they have some relief space. If they think that maybe he can do a kind of dual role in a way that they haven't really done much of in recent years. Like Grant Holmes was kind of doing that last year, but out of necessity. Like he was mostly a reliever and then became a starter because they had starting pitcher injuries and whatever else. So there's a role there maybe for a dual situation. But again, he's not a flamethrower. He's
Right.
an innings eater type, it seems like.
Yeah. And again, there are, if you want to go get guys like that, there are cheaper options than $5 million. Like,
Right.
guys like Jesse Chavez signed minor league deals, and
that's why I think that's why my suspicion is, and maybe I'll be wrong, that Alex or somebody in the organization is like, we see something that we're gonna fix in Griffin Canning and we're buying it.
yeah,
Um,
they think he's going to be the fifth starter. Like,
yeah,
pretty sure. Yeah.
Well, and you know this, Steven, but just for listeners, you also need more than 5 starters.
Right.
There's always this world where people talk about, oh, well, we already have so many starters. I already saw it today from Braves fans. Well, what about Smith-Shawver? What about Waldrop? I'm like, guys, there is every season is an evidence of this. Like, you need 9, 10, 11 starters. Like, it's not even an exaggeration. So, and this is also for the Braves. They have all of these guys like Smith-Shawver and Waldrop who are really cheap, and Schwellenbach is making pennies. Like, you can kind of more easily afford a $5 million semi-flyer on Griffin Canning because you have 3 or 4 or 5 rotation possibilities that are all making $1 million or less.
Right. If Griffin Canning had a minor league option, this is a no-brainer. Or if Griffin Canning's $5 million was already guaranteed and the Angels were just clearing some money, this is a no-brainer. The fact that it's neither one of those things is the only reason this is even a question at all, quite honestly.
Yeah. And maybe we'll learn, like, literally, again, we're recording this podcast on Halloween afternoon. There's a chance that we get reporting or Alex just says something on the record tonight. Like, I'm not saying that's not, I mean, so just keep in mind, that's why I keep telling you when we're recording this podcast, we're trying to give you an emergency reaction. As we get more information, we'll have full coverage on the show as we always do. But this could rectify itself very quickly. Alex could come out and say, we are tendering Griffin Canning. We like Griffin Canning. We like, that could be one area, or they say we are not tendering Griffin Canning. We don't know the answer, and we will at some point.
Yep.
Anything else to add, Stephen, before we sign off on a bizarre, strange Halloween 2:30 p.m. Eastern time recording?
This is day one. This is day one.
Literally day one of the offseason.
And we have one of our,
like midnight last night.
Yeah, so we have one of our biggest questions answered: which of the DHs is going to move and where is he going to move to? So, yeah, we've said it, like, this is going to be a very interesting offseason on a number of fronts, just because of how the season went, the new coaching staff and stuff like that. So, but yeah, day one, and we're already underway. So, hope everybody subscribed because the offseason is officially here.
Yeah, we are already underway. I am very thankful that we chose to do the DH conundrum episode 2 weeks ago and not today, because that would have been, at least we got a chance to talk it all out and prepare everybody for what was going to happen and lay the groundwork there. But yeah, we'll have more on this, I'm sure, more on Canning, more on, Fallout, et cetera, in the future. So please go ahead and subscribe. If you're a new listener that's finding us via YouTube or whatever, thank you for being here. Please keep us locked in. Subscribe on YouTube or on our audio platforms. I very much appreciate that. Steven, where can folks who might be new to the podcast follow you on social media and on your other non-podcast Braves offerings?
Yeah, B_outliers on Twitter, X, whatever you call it. And then Battery Power is where Scott and Sean and I all blog. Our buddy Chris and Demetrius over there. So yeah, but obviously on the Hammer Territory podcast is the most prevalent spot.
Nicely done. If people want to follow my work as well, I am at BT Rowland. And also, Hammer Territory has social media accounts across the platforms. We're on Twitter at Hammer Territory. We are also there on Instagram and on Facebook. One more plea, subscribe to the podcast. We'll have more to come. I promise you that. And without any further delay, we'll see you all next time.